figure out.
Okay. I'm glad we talked about that before.
Right.
So as soon as, okay, there's a couple people on the email.
Okay.
I also made it so that people can't unmute themselves. So if he wants to unmute anyone, he'll have to.
Oh, okay. So she's made it so that everyone will be muted. But if there's something you want to hear from or something, you just have to unmute them yourself.
Okay, we should unmute JoAnne.
Yeah, let's see. Has to unmute. Does that work?
JoAnne's not unmuted yet. Oh, there she is.
There we go. Okay. Okay. So I will give him back the host.
It's going to start, so they should just. So I'm back to being host. Should I? So I'm admitting everyone.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, no, it's recording.
I'm going to leave you for your show.
All right, I'm going to do it. Ready?
Okay. Should I start? Okay. Hi, I just want to welcome everyone for being here and thank you all for attending this last minute, very special event in celebration of Leo's exhibition here in Palo Alto, which is just beautiful. We are honored to have JoAnne Northrup here, who's the curatorial director of the Nevada Museum, and she will be in conversation with Leo today. I did want you to know that we will be recording this talk, and JoAnne and Leo will take questions, but if you could please enter them in the chat room so then they can respond to them. But I leave you to enjoy this wonderful conversation between Leo and JoAnne. Thank you.
So I guess I'll just start, Leo, with a quote, because when I think of your work, it reminds me of this quote by the astrophysicist Stephen Hawking. Remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet. Try to make sense of what you see and wonder about what makes the universe exist. Be curious. I feel that your practice over the past 2 decades demonstrates a sustained curiosity. So what's new about the work that's in the PACE show?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Liz, for organizing this. I'm really, it's kind of new territory for me to not be able to be present at the opening or exhibition, and being able to use all of these amazing tools that we have really helps a lot to connect. And obviously, I'm very happy to be able to talk a bit about the show, and I'm so happy that it's been able to host so many people, and there's been so much enthusiasm about it. So it's a this has been an interesting exhibition. We were originally going to open it in April, on April 2nd, and obviously that's been delayed. I think what distinguishes it is the use of this LED panel. So I'm using something that you would use to make a video wall. So in a way, it's more of a commodity product, whereas in the past, I've created all of my own technology and made my own LED everything and all the engineering. So I've been exploring this material for a while, and what's interesting about it is the increase in density. My initial works were about really reducing things down to the bare minimum. So the first light sculpture I ever made had 16 strobe lights, and I could turn them off or on. So I started with a very small amount of information, and was excited about the way that you could control light digitally, and that it really transcended everything that was possible with tech art. You know, at that point, I wasn't really satisfied with monitors or projections, and I think it's something that I found this, you know, I had this epiphany when I connected software and light and space. But that was in 1997, so that was quite a while ago. And you know, for me, it's been about creating my own software throughout and sequencing these things. But I'm artist first. You know, I studied sculpture as an undergraduate, and then went to a technology program for grad school at NYU, and then spent some time in Palo Alto at Interval Research. I thought I'd be a summer intern there for 3 months, and that turned into 3 years. So I'm, you know, that's another really special thing about this exhibition, is to be able to bring the work to Palo Alto and again to the Bay Area that I've had, you know, such a long and deep connection with, and it's a place of so much innovation and inspiration that it really has affected me deeply. So, you know, that makes it particularly special.
And it's incredibly hard to believe that the show that we worked on together for the San Jose Museum of Art was 10 years ago. Hard to imagine. So I have a question about working during the pandemic. So normally you are on site always when you debut a piece, because you always do last minute sort of tweaks depending on how the artworks work in the space. And how have you had to change your practice?
That's a great question. I'm here actually in my studio in Brooklyn. So it's great to be back in the studio. For a long time, we were kind of hunkered down on Long Island and not in the city. And it's nice to be able to see the city coming back to life. So that's really very exciting. And fortunately, I have this LED array behind me that represents 3 of the large artworks in the show, the 2 optical machines and the Musica Universalis. So I had a one-to-one mapping of the artwork here in the studio, so I could see it very precisely and know that what I was making here, I could then send to Palo Alto. So that was really something that was very, very special. So that part I felt comfortable with. And then we sent some of my studio team, who are really experts in kind of knowing the way that things should be, out to install the show. So gratefully they went and they were able to set up all the work and tune it and work with the PACE team. But it is something that is for me the most important part, is being present with the work and tuning it and adjusting it and making all those fine adjustments. But I think because of the circumstances, we've had to find other ways of working. And you know, the same thing, and I'm in an exhibition right now at the UCCA in Beijing, and we sent Ellipse out to another large work there. I was supposed to be present for that, but we had to find another way of working there. And the Illuminated River in London, which is my project with the bridges, with that, we're creating very accurate virtual reality models that show me exactly what the lights on the bridges will look like. So we're making huge advances in visualization, which is helpful for me, so I don't have to be, you know, getting on an airplane as much. And it's anyway, incredibly exciting. And so we're doing what we can, I guess, is the answer, and innovating our way through this.
Right. And it's also hard to believe that in 1997, you were doing physical computing. You were literally wiring things yourself. And to think that today, your tools have changed so dramatically. Now you're using VR so you can immerse yourself in the spaces.
Yes, it did start out very low tech with me wiring microcontrollers and doing all sorts of things, and that I probably shouldn't have been doing, because I'm not an electrician, although I'm I can do it in a pinch. But the work has evolved tremendously from the kind of cowboy style of the early work to the way we work now. I mean, now we have 10 people working with our team, and a really amazing group of technologists and 3D artists and kind of producers. And so it's coordinating all these things is quite complicated. And especially with the technical nature of it. So we have to make sure that that all works, but in the service of art. You know, it's art is first and ideas first, and not letting, you know, the kind of seductive materials kind of take over.
Yeah, that's great. And one thing though that has not changed a bit from your first project that you had at Burning Man in 1997 is the mesmerizing effect of your work, because I can see the work right behind you, and it's incredibly mesmerizing. And that reminds me, I feel like I see an art historical connection between your work and the optical experiments of Marcel Duchamp, the Dada French artist, who was actually creating these optical experiments back in the 20s. What about your art historical roots?
Yes, I'm a huge Duchamp fan, and spent a lot of time as an undergraduate at, you know, the art gallery looking at Duchamp's work. And year they would turn the thing on, and so I always imagined what that would look like. But you know, you know, his rotor reliefs I find fascinating. His use of chance, I think, is also very interesting. So all of that sort of adds up to something that's that I've found a way to integrate these things into my work. And you know, I'm interested in concepts of emergent behavior and artificial life. So I don't know in advance what's going to happen, and I have to set up certain conditions with my software, and then allow it to reveal itself in a way. So it's an interesting thing as a, you know, working with computers and technology. You think either a program is going to work or not, but in this case, you really can't improvise with it and almost treat it as an instrument and play it and be surprised by the results. And you don't know in advance. You have to feel very comfortable with that, not knowing, but then finding the solution. And you know, when I work on something, I work on it, you know, over and over. And when I get to the same place in multiple ways, then I know I've gotten to, you know, it's sort of telling me what it should be. So it's exciting to work through that and see what, you know, what the work ends up being.
And it's absolutely another thing from video art. There's nothing that relates it to video art. And I think that's something that I want to make clear, because it's constantly reinventing itself, and your role is sort of harvesting the most interesting sequences that the algorithm produces.
That's right. It's not, I'm not sampling anything from nature. I didn't go out with a camera and capture anything that I'm then filtering. I'm creating it from the ground up with my own code. And I'm interested in the single pixel and the way that, you know, you can build things up from that level. So when you get close to these pieces, you see that they are quite, you know, you can see all the single pixels, and then you move back a bit, and then it starts to blur into the whole. But that it's fundamentally created by these dots is very important to me. So that's something that is, you know, distinguishes it from video. And certainly the non-repetitive aspects of it. My work doesn't repeat. So once I've made these discoveries in these sequences, I create these more evolved compositions that are very layered, and then those are triggered in a random order and for a random amount of time. So you never see the exact same progression twice, which makes it something that is interesting. And you can also, sorry, are we good with the host? Okay. It's something that you can spend a lot of time with. And I think preserving the mystery is something that's very important to me, and not knowing. And because the work is abstract, that's another interesting part of it. It's not like I'm not using imagery or text, that you see it and you know it, and then you can move on. With these pieces, you're getting some information, but it's sort of fragmented, and your brain is trying to match it to something that you know. So that process of recognition is quite interesting. But then the work starts to change. So it's this kind of slipperiness that I think is quite interesting to play with. And it's also the open-endedness. So people can come to it and have their own subjective experience. There's no one way to look at it. So I think that's something that elicits joy in people, because so much of the digital technology we're surrounded by has such a, you know, kind of intense agenda like, go here, do this, buy this. And, you know, it's like this thing is, you know, it's overwhelming. But what I enjoy about the work is its open-endedness and the freedom that viewers have to just enjoy it and not really worry about it. And I think it does elicit the sense of wonder and the ability to, you know, to take people on a journey in a way, because these things are in a way vehicular, so they can, you know, as you were mentioning before, this kind of mesmerizing quality does access something deep in us as humans and takes us somewhere. So that's always been interesting to me. Yeah.
It's just that the digital campfire has gotten much more complex. And I like to think of your work as relative to pop art in a way, because you're sort of using pixels in the same way that like Lichtenstein used Ben-Day dots, if you zero in on it.
Yes, I really am inspired by Lichtenstein, and at the National Gallery, there was an amazing show where they had these explosion pieces of his, which I love. And I started to look at that and see the, you know, at work and in the work of Warhol as well. And I started to think that, you know, these LED walls are the equivalent of those things for the time, for the present time. So I think that's quite interesting to think about how these things are, you know, function in the day-to-day in our lives, so that we see on the sides of taxis or wherever, but they can be used in another way. And in a way that the layering too is very important to me, the layering of sequences. And I'm able to add light, I'm able to subtract light. So activating the negative spaces is something that's also very important. It's not just about where the light is, it's the void. So it's something that's another lever I have to play with.
And it makes me think of some of the pieces are like in The Eye of Sauron, you know, Lord of the Rings, where you just get sucked into it and you just can't stop looking at it. It's so wonderful. So back to art history, going back to Duchamp, I sort of think about your series, the Instance series, and I hope you'll show us one of them close up, but I kind of think of those as similar to Duchamp's Boîte en Valise series, where he had miniatures of every work he made in a suitcase, and it was portable. So can you talk about the series with regards to that?
Sure. Well, let me see if I can share my screen and show a video of the Instance works that I don't have here in the studio, but I can show you. So I've always been interested in scale and the way that Duchamp was able to recreate these miniature replicas of his work. So I make small pieces and then large pieces, and I'm very interested in that. And I started thinking about these LED works and the relationships between them. So I've always been interested in grouping similar LED works together to make a larger form. And with the Instance works, with these, there's a sense that each work shares a common sort of underlying DNA in its code, but then through the randomization, each one becomes a unique work. But what's exciting about the installation that we have in Palo Alto, there are 4 Instance works on one wall, and on the other, another 4. So you're seeing the same thing. It's almost like, you know, 8 portals into this world, and they seem to be doing their own thing. But at certain moments, there is a literal orchestration between them. So you'll see a certain pattern appear on one, and then move to the next and move to the next. So there's this orchestration that is really something that's quite unique, and something that is, you know, it's exciting to have that moment of synchronicity and to watch it drift back into kind of randomness. So, and to be kind of immersed in that and to be able to observe that effect. So it's, I mean, these are quite different than some of the early, you know, smaller LED works that I made that were tiny amounts of information. You know, now I'm dealing with a huge, you know, much larger canvas, but still this idea of seeing a single, you know, almost like observing a petri dish and doing all these experiments simultaneously and watching these signs of life, and it almost becomes as if you're looking at some sort of a creation myth, or some moment that you know, things are beginning, or and it could be something that's very small, like, you know, at the nanoscale, or it could be something very large, which is out in the cosmos. So I love that blurring of the idea of scale in these works. You don't quite know, you know, where you are, but unlike the Eye of Sauron, I think these are emoting good and positive energy, and something that, you know, does access, like you said earlier, the digital campfire, these things that are very human and universal, that are deep within us, that the technology sort of, you know, this use of it, you wouldn't think you could access these responses that we have as humans to things like a sunset or the movement of water, all these things that we're drawn to. But I found a way through code to connect to those same responses and to recreate those things, which I find fascinating, that you can do that with computers and sets of numbers, things that are very cold, but still finding that humanity. And I think it's, you know, that's something that I find, you know, to be a huge inspiration.
And I would say your work does serve as a gift, unlike, you know, advertising or things on the internet. You know, they're not trying to extract anything from the viewer, they're trying to give something to the viewer. And I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, I do think that, you know, I made my first light sculpture, Burning Man, in 1997. And I think that, you know, one of the 10 principles is about gifting. And it's also about communal activity. So bringing people together. And, you know, the reason I went out to work at Interval Research was because I wanted to do virtual reality, you know, 30 years ago. So I was inspired by Jaron Lanier and all these pioneers of VR. And in order to do that, I had to go and, you know, go to an academic environment to get on the, you know, the multi-million-dollar Silicon Graphics workstation. And we had to get this sensor, that sensor, and these haptic feedback things, and a certain chair, and all this stuff. And it was a bit of an arms race to get all this. And once you got it, then you could put on the head-mounted display, and then you were in this world that was sort of very empty, you know, just some polygons, and you're there, it's very lonely. And I'm like, wow, you know, this is, you know, this isn't what I thought it would be. And that's about the time I went out to Burning Man. And that's when I put, you know, I made this light sculpture, and I realized that I could take this digital thing and bring it out into the world and present it, and that people would gather around, and it could become something that was very interesting, even though it was so low resolution. But that moment of like bringing people together and all click together, light, space, and code. And you know, as much as I like these, you know, I'm excited about virtual reality, I still find that being together as a group is very important. And I think that's what I've seen with the Bay Lights, for instance. You know, it's just so amazing to watch people who don't know each other at all down on the Embarcadero looking at the Bay Lights, and they can't help but talk to one another. So you're sort of creating, you know, you're doing what everyone talks about, creating a sense of space and community. But to really connect people through this work is very exciting, and to be able to do it on a, you know, this huge scale where you can literally, you know, hundreds of millions of people can see it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And, you know, there's the digital campfire, and then there's also sort of an experience of stargazing. Like, I think of your piece, an early piece called Hive that was in the show at the San Jose Museum of Art, and you had it on the ceiling. And, you know, how about that? Like, how does that figure into this kind of work that you're doing now? What about Hive and the older pieces?
Yeah, you know, it's like revisiting old friends. It's interesting to see how the work evolves, and I think exploring different places where work could be. You know, the ceiling, the walls. You know, and this sense of immersion, which is quite exciting. And it's something that I'm starting to participate more in, is creating immersive experiences, which is something that I've always been drawn to. So particular spaces, whether at the Brooklyn Anchorage years ago, or a group exhibition I organized at White Columns called Synth, that occurred inside of a giant inflatable bubble. It was Paul Ha's last exhibition, and it was the summer of 2001. And there wasn't anything that Paul wouldn't let us do. I said, Paul, we're going to do a 24-hour listening party. And he's like, great. We're going to do, you know, bring in all the sound equipment and projection. And I mean, it was just this highly experimental moment, which was very, very interesting. And, you know, I'm just, you know, now participating in an initiative called Super Blue, which Mark Glimcher has started. And it's the idea is it will create immersive experiences. And so I'm going back to some of my roots and thinking about the zero gravity couches I designed years ago, which distribute body weight and it was used a lot in virtual reality to help you sort of leave your body. And in 2001, I created a bench like this. And I've been interested in artists created furniture for a long time. Certainly inspired by, John Chamberlain and his barges in Marfa, or at the Warhol Museum, and really creating a space for viewers to be. And some of my early work was sound. I used only sound. So I think it's something that all of this is kind of coming full circle in a way. And it's great to have done those early experiments because they become the outline for the future. So I'm in a deep excavation mode of my previous work and thinking about the future. So it's interesting in between space to be in.
And it's also interesting to me that the title of your show references music, but they are actually silent. So could you talk about that, sort of the visual music aspect of the work? Yes,
I've always been interested in the concept of synesthesia and remapping the senses, where and it's a neurological condition that some people have. And I was in a show that Carrie Brower organized at the Hirshhorn years ago, and it went from the Hirshhorn to LA MoCA, and talked about this kind of alternative history of abstraction, and integrated people like Oscar Fischinger doing experimental film, and Douglas Trumbull doing special effects, and all these things that were thought of as these kind of peripheral forms, but actually quite interesting to this idea of abstraction and where art was headed. So I was one of the few contemporary artists involved in that show. So I always think, what would these pieces sound like? And I've done some sound work with various artists for some exhibitions, and it seemed for a while it would kind of take away from the work, and it was just about the light. And I think a lot of the reason I was in that visual music show is some of my compositional methods are very similar to the way a musician might work, in the layering of things, and a repetition of certain motifs, and things build up and things break down. So I think there's a lot there, and I haven't really gone there, but I'm interested in finding someone who can help me with some of this music software and things that can kind of extend what we're doing with light and apply that to sound. So we'll see. It's going to be an exciting few years.
Yeah, and most of the work that you've done in the past few years has been primarily black and white. And do you see that continuing, or do you see that changing?
Well, I can show you. As I'm here in my studio, I'll just do a little rotation. This is I'm sorry about the quality here, but these are some color works that I'm working on right now. And these are inspired by my work in London for the Illuminated River. So these artworks have a kind of a similar aspect ratio to Monet's Water Lilies, and also the kind of the width of a bridge. So in London, I've been working on this project, an amazing project. Let me show a video of that.
Please.
Let's see here, 1 second. Okay, thank you for your patience while we go through can everyone see this? So this is a quite extraordinary project called the Illuminated River. And it was a competition to light, initially it was up to 17 bridges in London over the Thames, from Tower Bridge to Albert Bridge. So we, have been working feverishly. This is us in the studio with our LED wall and simulating the effects of the lights on the river. We've created a very elaborate system of software to control each of the bridges. Last year, we launched the first of 4, London Bridge, Cannon Street, Southwark, and Millennium. So we were able to to premiere those. And now we're working on the next batch of 5 bridges. So here I am out on a boat with my laptop and programming the bridges live. So it was quite exciting to be, on site. And this work had to be done, it was in the summer, so it would get dark in London around 10 p.m. and it would start getting light around 4. So that was what that was my working hours. So I'd go to work, and I basically stayed on New York time and had a very eccentric schedule, but was able to work there on the bridges. And finally, we launched this. The Illuminated River Foundation is an extraordinary organization that's enabled this to occur. Here's London Bridge with the light raking down the sides. This is Cannon Street, which is a rail bridge, which is activated again with LED light. This is Southwark, which is a kind of classic bridge, and then Millennium, which was designed by Foster's and Partners, that connects St. Paul to the Tate Modern. So really kind of an amazing set of structures to work with, each unique, some very utilitarian, others, these pieces of, contemporary, marvels of architecture, and others rooted in history. So each one is different, and each one has a different treatment of light. But, the inspiration comes from the Thames itself, from the movement of the water. The Thames rises and falls 5 meters twice a day. So it's quite extraordinary and active. So it's very exciting to channel that. And certainly the Thames is a place of creativity that has inspired artists like Turner and Whistler and Monet. So it's really been quite exciting to have the opportunity to work with this. So we're planning my next journey to the UK, and hopefully in March of next year, we will be launching the next 5 bridges, which include Westminster Bridge and Waterloo, some quite iconic bridges. So it's, it continues to unfold.
That's great. And we actually have a question from Abby Schneer. The bridges that you've done seem to enhance the characteristics of the bridges. Can you discuss this aspect of the bridges? Will you be doing similar things in the next 5? And she also says, I've walked the bridges and they're truly wonderful. So I can't wait to be able to fly to London after COVID and see them in person. Could you talk a bit about that?
Absolutely. We started, for me, it was an interesting process because I'm coming as an outsider to London. And there's a lot of apprehension about this is, so it was about listening and learning. So I spent long nights walking and around the bridges and seeing how people use the bridges, study the illumination of them historically and for special events like the Olympics or the current illumination. So starting with what was already there and finding the most sort of efficient way of activating them and what could we do? Because it wasn't about the sort of, it's not about the ego of the artist and here's my project and I'm going to use the bridge as a pedestal. That isn't the approach at all. It's really about how can we take this thing and change the way people see it through this subtle intervention and revealing the beauty of the bridges. So that was our goal. And I worked with Alex Leifshitz from LDS Architects who built the Golden Jubilee footbridge over the Thames. So he knows how to build a bridge and has worked in London and can navigate all the complexities. And we had to get 30 planning approvals to do our work. It was non-trivial and really incredibly complex. So I have a great team working with the Illuminated River Foundation and amazing contractors. But it, again, was about observation and seeing what we could do to activate what was there. So each bridge is slightly different, although there are certain motifs that are you can see connections between various bridges. Some use color, washes of color. Others activate volumes of light underneath so these cast iron bridges. Others use nodes of light. When we get to Albert Bridge and Chelsea, those have nodes. So that will be more similar to the Bay Lights. So each bridge has its own sort of feeling, but there is something that unites them all. And I think their connection to responding to the kinetic activity from whether it's traffic or the pedestrians or the movement of water is what inspires it. So it makes it feel appropriate for its site. And again, it's about the tuning process. And there was a lot of apprehension when I went to London, and some residents who lived nearby were very concerned. And And so I went and met with them several times to sort of explain my process, my approach. Initially they were apprehensive, but now they've really become some of our biggest fans. And, you know, we had a light go out and they were the first ones to call and say, hey, let's get this fixed. So, you know, it's interesting when you involve the community, and as we did with the bay lights, we all did it together. And the contractors that installed it could bring their families at, you know, at night and show them what they did and feel a sense of ownership of it. So I think with these public projects, it's very important to involve everyone in the community and to have, you know, everyone feel like they were part of it. So that's what we've tried to do in London and have been successful so far.
And I think about the subtlety of the work and the fact that there's a lot of advertising, you know, a lot of glare and things around them. So how did you contend with that?
Well, I think what we're dealing with is we're trying to use, we're very concerned about energy efficiency. And that's one of the things about the LED that's so amazing is the amount of power that they draw. I mean, the bay lights uses less than $25 a night in electricity. And even that is offset with the credit. So in London, there's a tremendous concern with energy usage, and a lot of the lighting systems we've replaced, we've reduced the energy consumption, and that's what we're trying to do is use the absolute minimum amount of light necessary, and also to serve as a good example of ways that you can activate the city thoughtfully, because there is a lot of glare, and a lot of times people aren't really thinking about light and why is there light pollution going up into the sky or disturbing the birds, the fish, the bats, the eels. And we've talked to all of these, you know, the people who have concerns with this and taken their input. So what we tried to do in London is focus the light very tightly on specific parts of the bridges and not allow the light to spill out, which is another one of the, you know, innovative things you can do with LEDs now, is pointing the light very, very precisely with lenses. So I've worked, you know, the LED has really changed my work. I couldn't do what I do without it because of its, you know, it's very durable. It can last up to 100,000 hours, which is 11 and a half years if you burned it straight through. And it's something that, you know, also the ability to create color. You know, you can blend red, green, and blue, the three primary colors, and create 16 million variations. So there's a tremendous amount of possibility with that. So I think we're, you know, and we're very in tune with new innovations happening with light, and looking forward to new technologies that are even more efficient and more durable and allow us to do different kinds of work.
In fact, a question from Michael Lerner is, please talk about the evolution of LED technology and what it's enabled you to do now that you couldn't in the past. And you've had some really big lessons as far as bay lights. So talk about that.
It's, you know, at the end of the day, I'm making work that you have to plug in. So it requires a leap on the part of a collector. And our studio is very committed to engineering the work as robustly as possible, and thinking ahead of all the different things that could possibly happen and making a plan for those things. Because I want my work to be around in you know 100 years or 200 years. So we've been in the process of creating an archive and keeping very detailed notes on the work. And you know, there may be certain works that we just can't get replacement fixtures for. So those works, you know, may not be able to carry on. But others, it may be a solution like, you know, Dan Flavin, where they couldn't get the fluorescent bulbs for his work, but then found a factory that could make them and reopened it specifically to make tubes for Flavin's work. So I think there are a lot of new media conservators who are interested in this field. And so we're trying to do everything possible to ensure that success and to, you know, predispose the work to be functioning, and to anticipate these things way ahead of time.
And honestly, that reminds me of something that we've talked about for many years, and that is that the art is really the code, right? The code can migrate to another form or another platform. So could you talk about that?
Yeah, when we think about the essence of the work, it's about the, you know, the code, but then manifest in light, a certain type of light. So the type of light is very important. You know, the color temperature of the light, the beam angle, the brightness, all of those things, that the physicality of it is something that that, you know, we can measure and know exactly what it is. So that's good to have that data, plus documentation, you know, the best documentation we can possibly create, so that at some future date, you know, you have the original software, you have the data on what the light instrument was, and then you also have this, you know, these you know, video images. So hopefully with those bits and pieces, these things could be reconstructed at some future time.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Maybe we could talk about a project that's for the people in the Bay Area is close to home, your Buckyball at Stanford Hospital. Could you talk to us about that?
Absolutely. I've you know, really thrilled again to be working in Palo Alto, and let me see if I can get this. I was very, very excited to be able to create a Buckyball for the new Stanford Hospital, which is you know, quite monumental, about 30 feet in diameter, and it's 3 nested spheres, and it welcomes people to the new hospital. And for me, it was very important to kind of soften that approach. Obviously, you go to the hospital, it's not a place that a lot of people want to go, but you are there, and this was something that could be something sort of welcoming. So I was thrilled to work with Stanford and to be able to create this work. This is Raphael Vignoli's stunning building that has many vantage points that look out on the Buckyball. And so it's something that, you know, I was interested in this thing that exists at the nano scale, but then could also expand and connect. So it's a combination of hexagons and pentagons forming these spheres, and the spheres are then lined with LED tubes. So that piece is something that's there for you all to see in the Bay Area, and I highly recommend going by and visiting it. So yeah, it's been, you know, again, great to work in the Bay Area and to continue making different kinds of pieces.
Great. And Dennis B. Wanted to put in a note that there's also a Buckyball at the Exploratorium in San Francisco.
Absolutely. Yeah, thrilled to have a different kind of Buckyball with the nodes of LEDs. And I recently did a commission for the Moscone Center in the bridge over Howard Street that connects the 2 parts of that building. Different kind of bridge and a volumetric array of color LEDs. But you know, it's exciting to be able to activate these spaces and to really have an impact on the city and see how, you know, sort of the golden age of public art, and there's so many possibilities.
There really are. And I like how you balance your work. You have sort of a focus on the large scale public art projects, but you also have more intimate domestic scale pieces as well, like the ones that are at Pace right now. So wondering about that, like, do you think you'll return to color in your future sort of domestic or gallery scaled works?
Well, a lot of the things that we did in London with our software is, you know, it's very exciting, and that will allow me to create yet other work. So it's interesting how you learn something on a big public project that then you can apply to a much smaller scale piece, or you learn something on a small piece that can get much larger. So you kind of move back and forth between the studio practice and these, you know, city scale pieces. I also do, you know, architecturally scaled work, and then, you know, forthcoming these immersive experiences. So there's all these different kinds of engines and different applications. I mean, it's all tied together, but they do feed one another. You know. That's
great. So Leo, I'm wondering if there are any questions that are not in the group chat, if any of the illustrious attendees have questions, and you can unmute them and let them ask their questions. I'll put you on the spot if someone doesn't say something.
Are you unmuting, JoAnne?
No, I think you have the power to do that. Questions? How about Christine Kristen? I can put you on the spot because you're a friend. You're muted. Yeah.
I'm trying to.
I'm also on the spot because I had knee replacement surgery. This is why I'm lying here in my bed. I'm not on too many painkillers right now. Reasonably coherent. Got Mr. Beto with me.
Now, Christine, you were the person that I reached out to in the early 2000s, like 2007, when I said, you know, as you know, I started going to Burning Man a little bit a year after Leo did, and I kept hearing mention of his name, like there's this guy that's a burner and he does work at Burning Man, but he also is an artist in the art world. And I went to you and I asked you to introduce me, and that was the beginning of our project together. So thank you for that. Even if you don't have a question.
God, I'm so thrilled that many of my friends have better memories than I. Completely forgot that. Thank you.
That's great.
What year do you think that was?
That was 2007, I believe.
Okay. Well, I said it in the chat, but I just want to thank Leo again, because Leo, when he does public speaking about his art, never fails to mention Burning Man.
Yes.
And we all love and appreciate that so much.
We do. We really do.
Our thing gave you the opportunity to dream up this idea that has now become global and more fabulous. And
it's fantastic.
And
we have a question actually from Bacchus. And Bacchus says, you describe your works as vehicular, Leo. Will you ever mount a work, if you have not already, on an actual vehicle, do you think? Or is the fixed physicality integral somehow? That's a great question.
I mean, as Bacchus knows, we've collaborated on several art cars at Burning Man. So yes, we have done this on the playa, and it's been quite interesting to have the work move. And I recently saw the work that Jenny Holzer was doing with the LED trucks. And it was quite interesting to see her work out in the landscape and her messaging. So I think that's quite striking. And I've, been interested in that idea of like how to take the show on the road. Yeah, she's inspired me. It's got the wheels turning, so to speak.
That's great. That's great. I'm just giving a moment of pause for other people to send in their questions, send it in chat or otherwise. Leo, what else would you like to talk to people about?
Well, I just I feel very lucky to be able to make this work and have this exhibition at this time. And I just feel, so much empathy for so many artists and galleries and museums that are struggling. It's such a crazy time out in the world. And I think that I really have a lot of faith in art at this time. And I think art is super important for people. So it's exciting to see what's happening, here in the city in New York. Things are cautiously coming back to life, and it's great to see that the city is coming back. And I was here for 9/11, and I was here for Hurricane Sandy, and saw all these these things. This is another kind of terrible tragedy. It's different, but I do think that I have faith that we'll pull through and get through this time. And I think art is a really integral part to it. So I'm very excited to see what a lot of artists are doing out there. And so it's I think there is some reasons for hope here.
There definitely is. And I think that as an artist, your mode is creation. You are all about creation, and that's a net positive, and that links you with artists from the past. And I even think like the way that you embody creation in your work even reminds me of artists of the past, like Gustave Doré, even his series of etchings. You're just approaching it differently.
Yeah, it's, I was an art history major before I decided I wanted to study sculpture. So I spent a lot of time studying Renaissance art and all kinds of things. And, when I first started making these LED works, I noticed the texture of it and the black and white, and it had something to it that I felt like I had seen in these kind of bursts of light, and found my, Gustave Doré book on Dante's Inferno. So these very old ideas and things that are out there, I think it's exciting to be able to kind of explore these ideas with very new technology, but rooted in these old ideas about art. So it's a, in a way, the golden age of this stuff. And, for so many artists everywhere to have access to these things that we just didn't have access to previously. And then to be able to share that with the tools that we have. So I'm really interested to see what happens. And I recently, for Burning Man this year, sadly, Black Rock City didn't occur out on the playa, but it did occur in VR. So I experienced that with an Oculus Quest head-mounted display, and we created a 3D version of our camp. And I have to say, I was pretty amazed at the ability to, how familiar it felt. I bumped into friends, we had conversations, we went on adventures in the virtual playa. So we're kind of on the edge of a whole other revolution. It feels like that. I always was not interested in the optical qualities of these things, and they felt like they weren't quite there. But I think very quickly we are getting to there, and it's a whole other layer of being able to all, despite where we might be physically, all being able to share these experiences and spaces. And that's something I'm interested in, is how do I encapsulate what I'm doing and transmit that to people that may not be able to come and see it in person. So that's one of the big questions I have, and I keep challenging my team of, how do we make that, and what does that look like?
Right. We have a question from Mihail Lari. Hi, Leo. When we first installed Sky Study in a Utah home, it was adjacent to a glass expanse through which we could see the sky. Your work seemed to respond to how the light was changing outside. I know it wasn't, but it felt like it was. Are you considering works that will respond to the environment or use predictive software in some form?
Well, I could certainly use sensors with my work, and I have explored some of these interactive things, but I found that a looser coupling was more interesting, where I was creating work that I would consider interactive because it was site specific and tailored to its location. And I like those moments where things synchronize. You might be listening to something and looking at the bay lights, and suddenly it's connected. But it's, again, the brain's compulsion to recognize pattern and make meaning. So we can't help but doing that. I wouldn't rule out some of these things where, we do sometimes with some artworks have settings for daytime that's brighter, and then in the evening it might be not as bright. So it is responding to the time of day and the brightness, because, if you need something to read with a lot of ambient light, it has to be bright. But at night that can be overwhelming, and that's the last thing I want in my work. I want it to feel really good and not demand your attention, to be tuned exactly right, like an instrument. That is something that does, it feels good. So we spend a lot of time thinking about that and making adjustments for people in their homes where they can adjust it physically themselves. I haven't gotten quite into the predictive software, but it'd be interesting to experiment with that.
Mm-hmm. Really interesting. So this is a very interesting topical question. Why did the bay lights stay on the day of the orange apocalyptic ash? Or is that why?
I think there was some issue with the settings. Sometimes we, with our triggering settings, that it should go on at dusk and off at dawn. But throughout the year that changes, of course. So there's some adaptation, and for whatever reason, it stayed on during that time, and it was really shocking to see those images. And then at a certain point, we thought maybe so it's just one of these things that was sort of a fluke. But I think a lot of people said that seeing the lights sort of gave them hope or made them feel better about it. So I think it's interesting to see how these public artworks can take on other meanings as things move forward. In London, several of our bridges have been illuminated in blue in order to honor all the healthcare workers, and these things become these other these other symbols and take on meaning. And as we're seeing out in the world with our monuments, you know, these things are changing and flexible. And what is a monument? You know, is a very interesting question right now.
Yeah, that's a huge question of our time. And I think that we don't have any further questions unless someone wants to send one last minute one. But I have to say, Leo, it was a privilege of a lifetime to curate your mid-career survey exhibition while I was senior and then chief curator at the San Jose Museum of Art. And I was so happy that we got to work on our book together, which is such a great guide to your early work, you know, bringing you up to the National Gallery of Art piece. And it's a great continuing friendship, and I'm happy that I was here today and able to talk about your show.
Thank you, JoAnne. It's just so nice to have these long-term relationships, you know, that you can really talk about the work and you understand it in such a unique way. So really a pleasure to speak with you about it. And I just want to thank everyone at PACE, Liz and Hannah and Ben and Mark, and for all the work and putting the exhibition together, and the installation team under such kind of difficult and challenging circumstances. But I think we've made you know, many people happy and taken them on this journey when they really needed it to get your mind into some other sort of space. So I'm really happy that we were able to have the show, and just grateful to my team who enables me to do this, and just want to wish everybody the best, and you know, everyone take care and have a, you know, let's have hope, and you know, put art at the center of that.